Hello everybody and welcome to TNT Giving Back to Teachers video. In this video we're going to be looking at Planning with Purpose Part 2, and we're really lucky again to have the fantastic Robert Powell back talking about how we can reduce our workload and how we can plan effectively in our teaching. So over to you, Rob.
Welcome everybody. I hope you are going to find this useful. I am apologising first for the rush in the last one. I actually hadn't gone through for a full hour in testing, and I actually spoke too long, I'm afraid. So I'm going to actually do the bit that rushed at the end last time more slowly so that you don't lose the benefit of the ideas. I was actually got to the point in the last time that actually I was looking at how to plan a lesson on the back of an envelope. And actually I was outlining which of these ideas would actually hit which principle. The 8 principles in my new publication. So principle 1, if we take the topic of endangered animals, maybe with a year 6 class or a year 7 class in a secondary, okay, it starts off with the idea I outlined earlier with a PowerPoint to begin the kids and get them engaged at the beginning. So that's the first principle, and it actually is called You Ask the Questions. In other words, the idea is that kids get engaged and they then want to ask questions about what they've seen. So here's the PowerPoint that actually would engage them. Sorry, this is actually the questions the kids get. They're going to see 14 different animals on the left-hand side, photographs, wonderful photographs, and they have to decide whether this animal's fine, F, where it's threatened, T, or E, facing extinction. And the idea basically is that they're going to have a few seconds to look at each one of these. And they have to put an F, T, or an E in that box there. And later they would go into groups then to start to look at Y, and that's where they would decide which animal they're going to focus on in their more detailed activity. The idea is actually all of those animals actually were endangered. And so the problem we've not faced is actually we've got to find the questions that kids need to ask is why are these? And so the teachers have drawn up the criteria, and this is the point when actually we share the success criteria and model it. So we might take 1 or 2 of those animals as a modeling exercise and actually work out how are the working towards level, or the working at level, or the working at greater depth level. And this was developed by the team of teachers in the planning session I was doing with them. So we actually together did this, and they created their own criteria because there aren't any published criteria for endangered animals. And we would model that so the kids are clear what they got to do. And then actually we published the keywords. And the important about this is that the keywords need to be used in whatever writing they end up doing, or whatever talk they start giving in their manifesto. The basic idea is they're working towards creating an MP for animals, and they've each got to produce a manifesto how they're going to actually protect animals. And that would be the writing task to end with, or a speech if the teacher allows them to make it a spoken activity. So all these key words, and one of the ideas which you might like is to actually incorporate something like this, which is actually some scores. So that when you come to your writing, start to use some of the more technical words, the ones that are more challenging. And I've done this exercise in training with schools on many occasions. I've got a 13-image haunted house PowerPoint, which with the eerie music. And if they've got to do a piece of writing on a haunted house, we've actually got some adjectives like that. And you can have adjectives, nouns, verbs, adverbs, connectives. And I've even taken the idea with the model languages department so to actually use connectives with scores like that. And that's something that schools love, teachers love, because it's a very simple idea. But basically, once you actually model the criteria and you've got the jigsaw groups set up, now jigsaw I explained earlier, groups of 4 people, where each person takes a different responsibility to investigate different aspects of, for example, the elephant. And then they go and meet with others from different groups, okay, all looking at the same issue, and they produce an information sheet about that together, but they take their individual sheets back to their original group when they finished, and teach them all about the elephant and why it's endangered. All of the principles came into that activity. It was 3, 7, and 8 in that particular activity for the jigsaw. Okay, 3 group activities, purposeful and well structured. Group number 7, which is about independent work, and number 8, which is about working in, so that working with peer and whole self-assessment. And so principle 3, that's there. Principle 5 and principle 7 all come into the jigsaw group, so that they're actually working and they're hitting 3 principles in one activity. The next thing is that actually got to do some research. Individuals have decided, for example, I'm going to look at the habitat of elephants and why is they're threatened, whatever the issue is, whatever the animal they've been given to look at. And the teachers, when I work with them in the planning, we actually develop this scaffold to go with it. So it's actually helping. And the important bit probably we'd actually do 1 or 2 lines of an animal to model that before they start. But the key to success is down here. So they've actually got to, in this, do their own research using the scaffold, okay, to reflect differently on points of view and to think locally and globally. The next thing is actually reading comprehension. Principle 5, that's what it says. And the interesting thing about it, in order to find out about maybe the Harris hawk, which is the last photograph we saw, if they're working on that, they've actually got to find information, read it, understand it, and then produce a fact sheet on it for the other students in their jigsaw group. So it's a small group collaborative activity, but involving reading comprehension. So once again, the principles are coming in thick and fast. Throughout this period, principle 6, which actually says teachers should receive feedback on levels of understanding through regular questioning, which involves all learners. And when they identify misconceptions, they intervene, whether it be individual, group, or whole class level. And during the jigsaw, while they're doing that research, this is the time when the teachers, and the TA, if there's a TA in the room, are circulating, looking at the examples that the children are working on, looking at the scaffold they're using to see if they need any help, and giving them verbal feedback to modify what they're doing. And principle 8 comes in soon after that, because after they've actually completed their first draft of the work, the teacher actually brings examples out to the front and uses, this is an elementary technology, AVA visualizer, brilliant piece of machinery. Okay, and when they've produced their drafts of their agreed research, each group has to come out and put it onto the visualizer so the whole class can see it. And they start to give some feedback, basically, which needs to be acted upon by the person or the group that's presenting it. So they actually can feed forward the ideas that come from the discussion. So we're now involving principle 8 feedback on their initial drafts, okay? And then we introduce the idea of the manifesto. So the students know they've got to produce this manifesto, and we would discuss as a class, obviously, what a good manifesto does, because the manifesto is used by political parties to actually people to vote, and therefore we're actually going to talk through what a good manifesto will do. If you're going to be an MP representing animals, what will it model manifesto include? So you create the situation where they know what they're going to write, okay? And once again, we go back to the scaffold, which actually produces assessment criteria. And basically what we're going to do now is ask them to go through the following process. So the first thing they do is, having written their own manifesto first draft, they ask their peer partner to assess it against this criteria. So they basically, and they must do in a critical friend approach, which means I can say it could be better if, but they mustn't rubbish it or make fun of it. So it's very clear criteria for the feedback, and the feedback suggests a way to improve. and the teacher and team also may engage in dialogue during that period. Okay, and then actually we'll go through the stage when the teacher would audit the edits that have been suggested by the peer partners. The final thing is, because they're going to write, we want to involve personal targets. Very few schools wouldn't want them to integrate skills within this. So one of the things I've produced is actually a skills grid. And this skills grid, actually I worked with a Senko department for a morning, and we actually agreed that we actually identify what good skills are. So I can use paragraphs, I can use speech marks, I can use a semicolon and so on. And the basic idea is the children that actually at top of their manifestos would write, my targets are C8, C16 and C5 and so on, whichever ones they wanted to use. That concept can actually be transferred right away through to, for example, A-level, level 3 in an FE college by just changing the statements. And it's very interesting if you use grids like that, and when it comes to feedback in classrooms, you only have to look over a shoulder to say to a student, remember, C1 please. And they just write C1 in the margin, which is actually a hint that they've got to start using paragraphs. So it's actually verbal feedback, but at an A-level group it might be used more evidence with a quote please from the text if it was a Shakespeare essay, for example. Okay, and so you actually involve principle 4 and principle 8 in the personal targets. Now, other ways of introducing personal targets, which actually come under principle 4, that's progression routes that meet needs of individuals, support and challenge, to ensure feedback is acted upon by the learners, which is what I call feed forward. And that thing I introduced to my school when I was a head is we insist on, at the end of each piece of work, there was a target on content, effort and presentation, or a score, sorry, for those 3 headings. But interestingly, we said there must be a target added. So this teacher has actually written, please try to use more evidence to support your conclusions. That is the feedback. And what we actually suggested, and staff love this, is that you actually transfer it underneath the title of the new piece of work in the exercise book. I will try to use more evidence to support my conclusions. So that is fed forward from the feedback in the last piece of work, and is directly under the heading of the new piece of work. That reminds the student, A, to do it, but B, the teacher to look for it. And what we also used is little on target stickers. So when actually students did achieve their target by using more evidence, the sticker would go into the margin. And the remarkable thing was, children started going out in lessons during the lesson and saying, I've done it, can I have my sticker please? So it was actually a feed forward system that staff and students loved. We soon had to order more and more stickers because it was so popular. Staff actually said they thought that was one of the things that changed a culture of failure into a culture of high expectations, because the kids kept getting rewards the moment they actually acted upon the feedback that had been given earlier. So we've actually now got, maybe go through peer assessment. Okay, so they've done self-assessment, peer assessment, and the basic idea here is that the teacher, okay, gets them, they must firstly self-assess using the published criteria. When they're happy with their self-assessment, their peer partner peer assesses it using the criteria. And finally, it goes to the teacher, which is basically auditing whether the conclusions are right or not. So it's not a full marking load, it's reduced it dramatically by incorporating the 3-stage process. Now then, one of the things I promised to do also was actually to look at the issue of time, because many of the schools I worked with on inset, the teachers complained because they used to have, perhaps if they were a department in a secondary school, say the history department, might meet once every month. And many schools in that era used to have the first Monday of the month was heads of department, the second Monday of the month would be heads of year, the third Monday of the month would be year groups, and the fourth would be department meetings. So the very people who were planning 25 lessons a week only met once a month. Now that has to change dramatically, because the concept of the principles is we produce a menu of strategies to meet each principle together. We share together. So when you saw that particular activity on endangered animals, that was with a year 6 team for the morning, and we actually produced the PowerPoint, we produced the criteria, we produced the scaffolds, and we actually worked the whole thing through together. And the beauty of that is that the teams can actually share the load and share the investigations and so on. Now, many schools are actually finding time now. So, for example, schools in the primary sector who've got PPA, quite a lot of schools I work with are actually allocating the time together. Rock Ferry Primary School in Birkenhead. The head is somebody I've met many times, and she's absolutely superb. But basically, they actually, each team has one day every 2 weeks off timetable together for planning. Where I was a head in the Ormiston Sir Stanley Matthews Academy in Stoke-on-Trent, the head of maths eventually became the head there after I'd left the headship. And he introduced something which I wish I'd done, but I hadn't thought of. He sent kids home at 1:30 every Wednesday. Every single Wednesday, they go home at 1:30. And from 1:30 till 4:30, they have staff development team in departments. And they actually have time together to plan together every week for 3 hours. And that has, Mark, the head, said to me one day, we always knew what we had to do to improve achievement. We just didn't have the time. Now they do. Huntington School in York, which actually John Tomset's the head of, is very quite well known. John's school, I think it's every 2 weeks, Monday afternoon. The children go home and the departments have time. So schools are doing this kind of thing. But I just wanted to leave the last quote really for John Hattie, who says that the most powerful is when teachers plan together, work together. And the heart of this is actually very clearly teamwork, because the planning load can be dramatically reduced if someone says, I'll do the PowerPoint, someone else says, I'll do the scaffold, and obviously everyone can input ideas onto it, but basically it's helping the team. But we've got to find the time. Without the time, this won't happen. Okay, the next thing is basically is national curriculum expectations. If that's what the manifesto is like that, I just urge you to think about the product idea, because one of the most amazing things that happens when you're working towards a product at the end, okay, is that you can actually get kids engaged from day one, knowing what they're going to do. Now, when it gets to the whole concept, if any of you like this concept and you want to sell it to your leadership teams and or if you are leaders and you'd like to introduce it to the staff, most head teachers, and I've worked with a lot of head teachers over there. I've done over 2,000 inset days with schools, and I meet the heads and leadership teams usually before we plan it. They have these different competing emotions in their heads. First of all, the head is saying we've got to get good attainment and progress levels. So there's data. We've got to produce data. We've got Ofsted coming in, so we've got to make sure we meet Ofsted. So things like lesson plans, which Ofsted used to look at, they don't anymore. So we introduce conformity in planning. So we say you must all follow this particular plan, which has a starter. Then you actually go through an introductory phase, a deep learning phase, and then have a plenary. And then we accompany that with scrutiny and surveillance. And that is actually the head speaking. In the heart, many school leaders, and certainly this was me, I wanted to see the joy of learning. Whenever I actually appointed members of staff, I think I said, I used to watch them teach, but I'd sit at the front looking at the children's faces. I wanted to see the kids engaged. I love to see creativity and action in the classroom. My concern also is with staff and student well-being. Some research out quite recently is saying that the number of high stakes tests being done in schools is actually having a huge impact on the anxiety levels of students. We know it does with staff already, but with students as well. I want to see professional autonomy. I want people making decisions. I want people being allowed to use a variety of practice. When I did the session in Cornwall, which I described earlier, where I actually interviewed 7 students about what good teachers do, a number of them said in that interview that they loved teachers who didn't do the same thing all the time. They said, we hate PowerPoint all the time. We'd like to see variety of practice. And I also want to see trust and relationships being built in the staff room, because happy staff rooms, okay, means you don't have people leaving all the time. Okay, and it's actually they work together and actually get on very well. So that's what the heart says. Okay, and if you actually agree with all that, then these are the following steps I would suggest that you follow. First of all, you've got to sell it to the SLT, and I'm happy to do any online webinars with staff rooms or with leadership team if you want me to actually introduce why the concept might be something you want to look at. You then have to go through the process of agreeing evidence-based principles, and I would suggest you involve the staff and governors and bring your teaching assistants in as well to that, so that all the staff who will be working in the classroom understand what this is all about. And I would urge you to think about your principles. I've introduced 8 in this latest publication on the website, but basically ownership is very important. So you may agree with the vague ideas of my principles, but you want to change the wording, you might want to add a principle, take one out, or modify it in some way. You've got to own it. If you then agree the principles, we have to accept that those are the principles that need to be whole school. But then the teams meet. So if you're a primary school, it'll actually be with the early years team meet, maybe year 3 team meet, year 4 and 5 and 6 and so on. And in the secondary sector, almost certainly it'll probably be teams in departments. Huge faculties. I've worked with a college a few years ago that had 28 people in a faculty, and I don't think you make decisions in groups of 28. I think you need it through subject-based groups meeting and agree the strategies. So every team meets and says, okay, we've got to make sure learning intentions are clear to all pupils. How do we do that? And there may be 5 or 6 different ideas that people share, and they go into what you call, your department handbook or your department planning document, whatever you want to call it. You use keywords. So if you like the idea of the jigsaw for group activity, for structured group activity, use the word jigsaw, because if it's actually a phrase like everyone understands the word. So if you like support groups, where students actually meet in little groups of 4, mixed ability group of 4 that all trust each other, use the phrase support groups. If you actually like the idea of the snowball, where students work on their own for 10 seconds, in pairs for 20 seconds, in groups for 2 minutes to brainstorm ideas. If you like the snowball, you use the word snowball. And then you publish a handbook or lexicon of key terms, including all the jigsaw, with a short description, of what that particular word means and how it's organized. You don't need to have any more detail than that in the lesson plan. You can put the word jigsaw then, because any senior leader who wants to see what a jigsaw is can access your handbook and actually know what a jigsaw is. The beauty of this is you're planning for the children and yourself, not for leadership. So jigsaw is a phrase you and the rest of your team understand. It's a shared vocabulary. We all understand it. And then you can plan the lessons using the keywords. Now, obviously, you would want to review these techniques, this particular handbook of strategies. Somebody goes on a course and comes back full of a good idea that they've come across on a course. You add it to the ideas. So in other words, it's a dynamic list of ideas, but you all use the terms and the phrases and start planning in a very simple way. One idea which I want to share with you as well is that actually if you want to produce a handbook, this idea works quite well with some. So you put the principle in the left-hand column, you put the evidence as to why it's important on the right-hand side, and then you actually list the different techniques that you'll use. At some point over a period, the variety, you'll all use all of them probably, but those actually will be in your handbook with a short description. So any member of staff who joins the team, comes from a different school or an NQT joins the team, they've instantly got a handbook of really good ideas with a short description, so that's actually like a resource manual for them. Something else which you might want to do is then actually answer the questions, and by you actually describing exactly what that is, you're modeling what the answer the questions technique's about, and it means that new members of staff can see exactly what you're talking about. So if you actually want to look at the success criteria and have a clear picture of what success looks like, one of the things I've recommended to people is they actually develop what's called a scheme of learning. The scheme of learning, we move down. If you see this page here, which is page 1 of a scheme of learning, it's taken from the scheme of work. Now, many people listening to this, I'm sure, are in schools where you have to develop schemes of work. They're laborious. You have to detail what you're going to teach, what skills you're going to develop, okay, what concepts you're going to actually understand. And what this team did with our scheme of learning was to take from the scheme of work, these are the things we are going to cover in this endangered animals scheme. And what you create on there, okay, is an extract from the scheme of work tied to the lesson plan. And the lesson plan isn't for one lesson, it's for 4. Recognizing what I said earlier, that very few people will actually develop a lesson, a theme or topic that lasts a single lesson. And the beauty of this is you're addressing the key questions which are important, what animals are endangered and so on. And then some of the criteria, okay, that you can use as they work on it. And if you look down this column, this is the phase of the lesson. The little red line denotes probably where you're aiming to end by the end of that first lesson. So we're doing the PowerPoint, okay, which I've shown you. We've got to plot in endangered animals around the world on a map, okay, and then, okay, the scaffolds being used for that, okay, the fact sheet, the map with numbers. You're going to get oral feedback from the teacher and the TA during that period, okay, and then you're actually going to, you know, to speak about some of the things that you found in the column here. Now in lesson 2, okay, basically you had a homework. You can report back from the homework the causes of animals being endangered. You're going to categorize them using that scaffold I showed you earlier. And you're then going to do a jigsaw analysis of one of the animals that you've been allocated by the teacher or by the group choosing. So there's going to be a visual map, which I showed you in the previous webinar. Okay, and there's going to be a scaffold. This will actually be peer assessed. So the assessment column. Okay, it will involve speaking and group collaboration. In lesson 3, they're going to revisit and identify patterns, developing countries. They're going to snowball ways to protect animals. They're going to produce a visual map of strategies. They're going to introduce the idea of the manifesto. There's a visual map with images and a scaffold for that. And finally, they're going to write their manifesto. And that's formal, right? The assessment's formal assessment through the teacher marking it, or through the peer assessment, self-assessment, and that will involve form. Now that actually, what I like about this, it's actually 4 lessons. Why is the arrow there? The arrow actually is movable. And the beauty of that is that if a senior leader came in to watch your lesson, you can show them that, say that's where we are. They can see what you were doing yesterday. They can see what you plan to do tomorrow. You don't get any of these silly comments, there wasn't any group work there, because they expect to see group work. You can see that that's going to happen tomorrow. The important thing about that is actually a series of lessons planned by a group of people together. That particular, that template can be used time and again, using this replacing, and one person can produce the draft, share it with the team at their regular meetings, okay, and you actually break the workload down enormously from individuals planning late at night, at home at weekends, on their own plans. Okay, so you might end up with, this was done by one of the teachers. We agreed we would use a visual map. Okay, so one of the teachers did that. Another teacher agreed to do the scaffold. So we created, so the sharing the workload happened all the way through. This was the homework. Another teacher said, I'll produce the homework thing. And remember down the bottom here, some criteria, good, even better, excellent. One of the teachers phoned me after this particular lesson and said, you know, every single kid at homework went for this level here because they defined what excellent looked like and they all went for it. So all of this has been done by a team, okay? And basically, just to remind you that there's 8 principles in this particular series. Principles 1, 2, and 3 are now available on our website. 4 is underway today and actually be finished to be on there early next week. 5, 6, 7, and 8 will be done, but basically they're available for download. Okay, and eventually the whole thing will be published. Okay, hopefully as an ebook. But that's, ladies and gentlemen, is the bit that I rushed last time, so forgive me, and I hope you found that useful. This is the research that I used, if it's any use to you. Okay, and these reports, research ed, I'm not too convinced by, so I would I'll remove that from the list, I believe. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for listening yet again to me going on and on about my passion. Keep well.